Hello everyone, welcome to yet another session. Today we are going to be looking at the multiplier grade 12 economics. This is one of the topics that learners do not usually do very well in. So what are our lesson objectives? By the end of this lesson, you should be able to define or briefly describe what the multiplier is, calculate the size of the multiplier, as well as graphically represent the multiplier. Let's look into this question. Copy the graph below in the answer book. Indicate the new consumption curve. So let's identify the things that the examiner wants us to do. Indicate the new consumption curve. Indicate the new consumption curve. What else? The new equilibrium formed after an investment increased by 20 million. And finally, describe the multiplier. So we are supposed to indicate the new consumption curve, the new equilibrium formed after an investment has increased by 20 million, and describe the multiplier effect of the increase of investment of 20 million on the economy. First of all, let's start by briefly describing what the multiplier is. The multiplier is a small change in spending that results in a more than proportionate change in income. A small change in spending that results in a more than proportionate change in income. So the graph is going to help us explain what really the multiplier is all about. Before we start answering the question, let's start by analyzing the graph that we have been given. Let's start by analyzing the graph. So if you go back to the definition of the multiplier, you are going to see that there are two pillars. Expenditure, what is its effect on income? Expenditure, what is its effect on income? So if you go to the diagram that we have been given here, or the graph that we have been given here by the examiner, we see that on the y-axis we have got our expenditure that is given here. We have our expenditure on the y-axis, and we also have our income on the x-axis. So we want to look at how does an increase in expenditure affect our income using a graph. So first of all, you are going to notice that we have given this dotted line. We are given this dotted line that starts from 0, and that dotted line is called the 45-degree line. That dotted line is called the 45-degree line because it's drawn at an angle of 45 degrees. So this line is called the 45-degree line. That is the name of this line. And then the other one that starts from 10, which is given a formula C is equal to 10 plus 0.5y. It's called the consumption curve. It's called the consumption curve. Now, what is the consumption curve all about? The consumption curve tells us or shows us the total consumption expenditure within the economy. I will repeat that one more time. It shows us total consumption expenditure within the economy. It shows us total consumption expenditure within the economy. Let's start with the first one. Let's start with the first one that has been given by the examiner. So this one is this 10 that you see here. This 10 that you see here is this 10. That 10 is called autonomous consumption. This 10 is called autonomous consumption. Autonomous consumption. What is autonomous consumption? Autonomous consumption refers to any expenditure or any consumption expenditure that is not dependent upon income. Autonomous consumption refers to any consumption expenditure that is not dependent upon income. What does that mean? Let's analyze that. What does that mean? Let's look at this 10. Let's look at the x coordinate and the y coordinate at this point. Let's look at the x coordinate as well as the y coordinate. So our x coordinate, which is our income at this point, is 0. And then what is our y coordinate? Our y coordinate is 10. What is our x what is our x-axis representing? Our x-axis is representing income. And what is our y-axis representing? Our y-axis is representing expenditure. Now look at this. So we are saying at this particular point, our income is 0, but our expenditure is 10. That satisfies the definition of autonomous consumption, because we said autonomous consumption is any consumption expenditure which occurs when income is 0. So the income is 0, but then there is a consumption expenditure of 10. That becomes our autonomous consumption. So this 10 is our autonomous consumption. And then the next thing that we need to analyze on this line is the 0.5. The 0.5 is our MPC, which is known as the marginal propensity to consume. Marginal propensity to consume. What is marginal propensity to consume? It's any increase in income that is devoted to expenditure. Any increase in income that is devoted to expenditure. So in this case, we have got our marginal propensity to consumption as, or marginal propensity to consume as 0.5. This becomes our MPC. So our MPC is 0.5. So on our consumption function, there are two things that we need to be aware of. Our autonomous consumption, which is 10, as well as our marginal propensity to consume, which is 0.5. Bear in mind that MPC also refers to the Monetary Policy Committee. So if the examiner is to ask you what MPC stands for, try to understand the contextual factors under which the MPC has been asked. It can be Monetary Policy Committee. If you are dealing with the Monetary Policy Statement and the South African Reserve Bank, then MPC would stand for the Monetary Policy Committee. But in this case, it refers to the marginal propensity to consume. Let's move on. So now we move on to the next thing. The next item that we want to analyze is the equilibrium. The point where the 45-degree line, meets the consumption expenditure, this point. The 45-degree line, its purpose is to indicate all points at which income is equal to expenditure. The function or the purpose of the 45-degree line is to indicate all points at which income is equal to expenditure. So any point that is lying on the 45-degree line, it indicates all points at which income and expenditure are the same. I'm going to mark this one E1. So if you look at this point, you are going to see that at E1, what is our income? 20. What is our expenditure? 20. So when the consumption function cuts the 45-degree line, at that point, income and expenditure are equal. So I believe we have so far explained what the examiner has given us. Now let's move on. Indicate the new consumption curve. So we have got the old consumption curve, which is C is equal to 10 plus 0.5y. Indicate the new consumption curve after investment has increased by 20 million. So there's been an increase in investment of 20 million. What do we do? The first thing when you are given a question on the multiplier is start by calculating the size of the multiplier. Start by calculating the size of your multiplier. Always start by calculating the size of your multiplier. The multiplier is calculated as follows. It's 1 over 1 minus MPC. That is the formula that we use to calculate the size of our multiplier. Bear in mind that on this question, we were not given what is this the value of our marginal propensity to consume. We had to figure it out from the diagram. We said that this 0.5 is our MPC. Remember that MPC plus MPS, which is marginal propensity to save, will always be equal to 1. So you cannot say that my MPC is 10. So MPC plus MPS always gives you 1. So the examiner could have given you the MPS. You can work out your MPC from the value of your MPS. Now, let's move on. So it's equal to 1 over 1 minus, then I take this 0.5, I take this 0.5, I take that 0.5, and it becomes the value of my MPC, 0.5. Then you solve this, it's 1 over 0.5. 1 minus 0.5 is 0.5. That means the size of the multiplier is 2. That is the size of my multiplier. What do I do with this 2, or what does this 2 mean? This 2 means that, let's go back to the definition of the multiplier. We said a small change in spending results in a more than proportionate change in income. So this number is just telling us that whatever we spend, we are going to generate twice as much income. So the income that you generate is dependent upon the size of your multiplier. If the multiplier is 3, you are going to generate 3 times more what you initially spent. Let me put this into perspective. It simply means that if we spend 10 cents, we are going to get 20 cents. If we spend 30 cents, we are going to get 60 cents because the size of our multiplier is 2. It tells us how much income is generated from the initial expenditure. So our multiplier in this case is 2. Now, let's go back to the question again. We are told that investment increased by 20 million. So this 20 million becomes our initial expenditure. It becomes investment expenditure. So we spent 20 million in investment. How much are we likely to generate from this 20 million? So you are going to take this 20 million as your expenditure. We want to see how much income is generated from the 20 million which was initially spent. So I'm going to continue with my calculations. So we are going to say 20 million. The 20 million is this 20 million given on the question. And then I'm going to say multiply by. Now this is where the multiplier comes in. Its purpose is to multiply. Multiply by what? Multiply by this 2. I take this 2, I put it here. Multiply by 2. It gives me 40 million rands. So it gives me 40 million. So we are saying a small change in spending, in this case it's 20 million, results in a more than proportionate change in income. There we go. So you can see now that I am using numbers to explain the multiplier. A small change in spending, 20, results in a more than proportionate change in income, 40. That is exactly what the multiplier is all about. So now the next step is now to take these numbers and put them on the diagram, because the examiner is asked you to indicate the effect of this 20 million as far as income is concerned. So what I need to do now is take these numbers and put them on the graph. So I've got my 20 million, which is my expenditure, and then I've got my 40 million, which is my income. So I just need to take these two numbers, 20 million for the expenditure and the 40 million for the income, and then put them on the graph and draw the new consumption curve. What do I do? First point on the diagram, you go to the initial consumption expenditure. Go to the initial consumption expenditure. The line is starting from 10. There you are. That is where the old consumption curve is, because the examiner has asked us to draw a new consumption curve. So we start from the old consumption curve. So the old consumption curve is starting from 10. Then we are told that there's investment increased. There's a keyword there. Investment increased by 20 million. Investment increased by 20 million. There is the word. Investment increased by 20 million. So we said our investment, we are going to take it as our expenditure. We spent 20 million in investment. We want to see how much are we going to generate. So we are going to increase our expenditure by 20 million. So you go to the old consumption curve and then increase by 20 million. So you are at 10. increase this by 20 million. So we are saying 10 plus 20, it takes you to 30. There you go. So the new consumption curve will start from 30. How did I get the 30? The old consumption curve is at 10. Then we have increased our investment expenditure by 20. So it's 10 plus 20. It gives us 30. So we've got our first point here. Then what do we do next? We know that if our investment increases by 20 million, we are going to generate an extra 40 million. Where am I getting the 40 from? We have already done the calculation here. 20 times 2, 2 being the size of our multiplier, then we got 4. Then you go to your diagram on the income axis, which happens to be the x-axis. You go there. Now, before this investment was introduced, how much was our income? Our income was at 20. We were not at 0. We were at 20. So you go to your 20. There you go. Then what do? You increase your income by 40. You increase your income by 40. So I'm going to say 20 plus 40. And then it gives me what? It gives me 60. So it gives me 60. I'll be here. So it's 20 plus 40. The same way I did on the y-axis. I said 10 from where the consumption curve is starting from plus the 20. The 20 is this one. Then I got 30. Then on the income axis, I do the same. It's 20 plus the 40, which is the increase in income, and then it gives me 60. There we go. All right. Now, what do we do from there? Now, we draw a line starting from 60 until it joins the 45-degree line. You take a ruler, you draw a vertical line until it touches your 45-degree line. So I'm drawing my line here. There we go. I draw my line here. Do not forget to bring your ruler in the exam. So there is my line. And then what do? Remember, we said any point that lies on the 45-degree line, it becomes equilibrium. It means that its expenditure is equal to income. So if this is 60, it also means that I have to find my 60 this side. There we go. This becomes my E2. This becomes my E2. Remember, it's one of the things that the examiner has asked you. The examiner has asked you to show a new equilibrium. The examiner has asked you to show the new equilibrium. This becomes my new equilibrium. So I've got my E2 there, which is my new equilibrium. I am done with the diagram. So what do I need to do now? I just need to join the 2 points, starting from 30, passing through the equilibrium point. That becomes my new consumption curve. So you take your ruler, you draw a line starting from 30, passing through the new equilibrium, which is E2. Then you draw a line there. You draw a line there. There you go. That becomes your E2. E2. So this becomes our C. I can say this is my C1, my consumption curve 1. This becomes my C2 is equal to what? Remember, the first consumption curve was starting from 10. There's the 10. This one is starting from 30. That becomes my 30. Plus, the MPC is a constant. It doesn't change. It becomes 0.5y. So what have I done? I've indicated the new consumption curve. I've also indicated the new equilibrium. Then you just draw an arrow to indicate where you are coming from, where you are going. Now, if you look at the definition of the multiplier, a small change in spending, so we are looking at 10 to 30, brings about a more than proportionate change in income, which is from 20 to 60. That means I have managed to explain to the examiner the multiplier principle using a graph. Even if you are to measure the distance from 10 to 30, you compare it with the distance from 20 to 60, you are going to see that This one is much bigger than the distance from 10 to 30. That is exactly what the multiplier means from a graphical perspective. In other words, there is another way that the multiplier can be calculated. There is another way that we can calculate the multiplier. I will quickly show you how you can also calculate the multiplier. The multiplier can also be calculated as follows. So the multiplier can be calculated as follows. It's K for the size of your multiplier. It's K is equal to change in income divided by change in expenditure or change in injections. So the small little triangle represents change. Change in income divided by change in my expenditure. Now look at this. What is our change in income? Our income was at 20 and it went to 60. So my change is 60 minus 20. That is the change. The 40 is my change. Then you divide this by your change in expenditure. Our expenditure moved from 10 to 30. So I'm going to say 30 minus 10, which gives me 60 minus 20 is the 40. You remember the 40? Divided by 30 minus 10 is the 20. This 20 is what we are given here by the examiner, is this 20. And then how did we get this 40, by the way? Remember, we said 20 times 2. That's how we got the 40. And we get here 40 divided by 20. We get 2. This is exactly how we calculated the multiplier earlier on. How did we calculate the multiplier earlier on? We said 1 over 1 minus MPC. 1 minus 1 of 1 minus 1 over 1 minus MPC. So it's 1 over 1 minus 0.5. And then it gave us 2. Then how did we use the 2? We said our initial spending is 20 million. The examiner may not actually use the word spending. The examiner can say government expenditure. The examiner can say investment and expenditure and so on. So in this case, our investment expenditure was 20. Since the size of the multiplier is 2, we are going to say 20 times 2. Then that's how we got the 40. Then you increase your income by 40 from 20 to 60. And then you increase your expenditure by 20 from 10 to 30. That is how you graphically represent the multiplier. I hope you benefited something today. Thank you for watching. Hoping to see you next time. Bye for now.